The sun was sinking low in the western sky, turning the land gold and red as the cowboy rode through the open desert. His name was Ethan Cole, a quiet man with rough hands, a strong back, and eyes that had seen too much. He had spent most of his life working the ranch, mending fences, herding cattle, and sleeping under the stars. The world moved slow out here, and he liked it that way. But that evening, something felt different in the air. Something that stirred an old memory he thought he had buried long ago. Ethan had been away for weeks, driving cattle across dry plains to sell them in the next town. Now he was finally returning to his small home near the edge of the frontier settlement. Dust clung to his coat and hat, and the wind whispered through the dry grass. He could already see the distant outline of the wooden church, the water tower, and the saloon standing quiet under the sunset. It looked the same as when he had left, yet he felt as if years had passed instead of days. When he rode into town, a few people greeted him with nods. Old men on the porch lifted their hats. Children stopped their play to watch the tired cowboy pass. Ethan smiled faintly, though his heart felt heavy. His mother had died years ago. His father's ranch barely held together, and most of his friends had either left or been lost to time. He was 30 now, and the days all seemed to blend together. He tied his horse outside the trading post, hoping to buy a few supplies before heading home. That was when he saw them. A small group of Apache traders standing near the wagons, their dark eyes calm, their movements quiet and graceful. They had come to exchange handmade goods for food and tools, something the town allowed under a fragile peace agreement. Most settlers kept their distance, still carrying fear from old battles that had scarred both sides. Ethan looked at them with quiet respect. He had no reason to hate them. Long ago, before the troubles began, he had played with an Apache child by the creek that separated their lands. They had built little boats from leaves and raced them on the water. He hadn't thought of her in years, yet somehow that memory rose like smoke in his mind as he watched the group, and then he saw her. She stood apart from the others, wearing soft tan buckskin that caught the wind lightly around her legs. Her long black hair was braided and tied with feathers. Her eyes, deep, bright, and steady, met his for a single heartbeat before she looked away. Something inside him froze. He didn't know why at first. But when she turned back, her lips curved into the smallest of smiles and his breath caught. She walked toward him slowly, her steps sure and graceful on the dusty road. The others turned to watch, the townsfolk too. Ethan stood still, his hat in his hand, his pulse suddenly quickening, though he didn't know why. When she stopped before him, the setting sun behind her painted her face in soft gold. Her voice was gentle but carried the strength of someone who had crossed miles of desert and years of silence. "Don't you recognize me, cowboy?" she said quietly. "I'm your childhood love." The world seemed to stop. Ethan stared at her, unable to speak. The name came to his mind like a whisper from the past. Taya. He saw flashes in his memory, 2 children running barefoot near the creek, laughing under the summer rain. She had given him a little bead once, blue as the sky, telling him it would keep him safe. He had kept it for years, tucked inside a box in his room. But after her people left, after the fighting began, he had thought she was gone forever. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Taya?" he said softly, almost afraid to believe it. She nodded. The smile that touched her lips was sad but real. "It has been many years, Ethan." He didn't know what to say. Words felt too small for what was rising in his chest. "I thought you were gone," he said finally. "My family left for the mountains when the soldiers came," she answered. "We lived far from here, but peace has come again, at least for now. I wanted to see the land where I was born, and the people I once knew." Ethan looked at her hands, steady, strong, a little rough from travel. She wasn't the small, shy girl he remembered. She was a woman now, one shaped by the land and the hardships of her people, but her eyes still held the same light that had once made him believe the world could be kind. The air between them was filled with silence, heavy and warm. Around them, townsfolk whispered. Some looked curious, others wary. But Taya stood tall, her chin lifted, proud of who she was. Ethan admired her courage. He cleared his throat and managed a faint smile. "You came back," he said. "Yes," she replied. "To find peace. And maybe to see if you remembered me." "I never forgot," he said simply. Her eyes softened. "Then time has not taken everything," she said. As the sun dipped below the hills, a quiet wind rose. The smell of dust and sagebrush filled the air. Ethan felt something awaken deep inside him, something that had been sleeping for years. He offered to walk with her as the traders prepared their camp outside town. she agreed. They walked together along the creek, the same one from their childhood. The water still moved gently over smooth stones, and the tall cottonwoods whispered in the fading light. They spoke of what had changed, how his father's ranch had grown smaller, how her people now traded instead of fighting, how both sides had lost too much to hate any longer. When she laughed softly at one of his old stories, it was like the years fell away. He could almost see them again as children, chasing fireflies and daring each other to climb the tallest rock. But when her laughter faded, a shadow crossed her face. "My people still suffer," she said quietly. "The land grows dry. Some settlers do not keep the peace. My brother was hurt last winter for crossing near the river. They said he stole a horse, but it was a lie." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's wrong," he said.
"It is," she said.
"But there are good men here too. I remember one of them." Her eyes lifted to meet his again. The stars began to appear one by one, bright against the darkening sky. Ethan wanted to say more, to tell her he was glad she had come back, to tell her that the empty years suddenly felt full again. But the words stayed caught in his throat. When they reached the edge of the camp, the firelight glowed softly between the tents. The smell of roasting corn and herbs filled the air. She turned to him, her face touched by the light of the flames. "Will you come see us tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I will." She smiled again, gentle and sure. "Then I'll wait by the river." As Ethan rode home that night, the stars watched him from above. The wind was cooler now, and the land seemed alive in a way it hadn't in years. He thought of her face, her voice, and the way her eyes had looked at him, not like a stranger, but like someone who had known him before the world became hard. He reached the ranch and sat on the porch for a long time, staring out across the moonlit plains. The night was quiet except for the distant cry of a coyote. He reached into his old chest, searching through old keepsakes, and found the small blue bead Taya had given him as a boy. He held it in his hand, smiling softly. Tomorrow he would see her again. The land had changed, people had changed, but some things, like the bond between two hearts once young and innocent, had survived the years. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, hope stirred in the cowboy's heart. The next morning came soft and golden over the wide desert land. Ethan woke early, the blue bead from his childhood still in his hand. He looked at it for a long time before placing it safely in his pocket. The sun was climbing slowly, the kind of quiet light that promised another dry, hot day, but his heart was not heavy anymore. He saddled his horse, brushed the dust from its mane, and began the short ride to the river where he had promised to meet Taya. The air smelled of wild sage and the faint smoke of campfires. Birds called from the cottonwoods, and the steady sound of the horses' hooves echoed softly. When he reached the edge of the river, he saw her waiting just as she said she would. She was kneeling near the water, washing small woven baskets, her braid shining dark in the morning light. When she saw him, she smiled, and it felt as if the whole valley warmed around him. "You came," she said softly. "I told you I would," he answered, stepping down from his horse. They walked by the river together, talking about small things. How her people traded herbs and beadwork, how the rains had been late again, how he planned to rebuild the south fence of the ranch. Yet under those small words there was something bigger, an old bond slowly waking up, something that neither time nor distance had broken. When they reached her camp, the Apache families greeted him carefully but without fear. Some of them remembered his father, who had once helped deliver medicine during a hard winter. Taya's brother watched him quietly, his eyes filled with the caution of a man who had seen too much loss. Ethan greeted them all with respect, shaking hands, thanking them for their welcome. As the day passed, children played near the fire, old women wove bright threads, and the men repaired their tools. Ethan felt a peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he wasn't just a cowboy trying to survive. He was part of something that felt alive and whole. Taya laughed more that day, showing him the beadwork she had learned, telling him how she had once dreamed of returning here when she was far in the mountains. But peace in the valley never lasted long. By evening, a cloud of worry began to rise. Smoke could be seen from the distance near the northern edge of town. The smell carried faintly on the wind. Ethan's heart tightened. He knew that smell, wood and dust and fear. The next day, the news spread fast. A small fire had burned through one of the cattle sheds near the town. Nobody had been hurt, but fences were lost and tempers grew quickly. Some men at the saloon began whispering that the Apache traders had started it, saying they had been seen near that side of town. The sheriff, a hard man with a scar on his jaw, rode out to question them. Ethan was there when it happened. He tried to speak, to tell them it must have been lightning. The storm the night before had rolled over the valley. But few wanted to listen. The fear was old, and it did not need truth to grow. Taya stood behind him, her face calm but her eyes full of quiet strength. "We did not harm your land," she said. "We have come only to trade and live in peace." The sheriff frowned. "Maybe so," he said, "but peace is a thin line out here. You'd best pack your camp and move along before the men get angry." Ethan's voice rose, steady but strong. "You can't ask them to leave without proof. I've seen that fence. It's lightning-scorched, not burned by hand." The sheriff gave him a long look. "You'd best stay out of this, Cole. You're making it your trouble." Ethan didn't back down. "Maybe it is my trouble." That night, tension filled the town like a storm waiting to break. Ethan couldn't sleep. He walked out to the porch, staring toward the dark hills where the Apache camped. He could see a faint light from their fire in the distance. The thought of them being driven away again made something twist painfully inside him. He saddled his horse and rode out under the stars. The ride was quiet, the land silver under the moonlight. When he reached the camp, Taya was awake, standing near the fire, her hair loose and her face turned toward the sky. She looked calm, but her eyes told him she had been waiting. "They're coming," he said. "The sheriff and some of the men. They mean to drive you out by sunrise." Her voice was soft but firm. "You think I will run again?" He shook his head. "No, not this time. You stood your ground once, and now I'll stand with you." The sound of horses echoed faintly from far away. The settlers were coming fast. Ethan turned to Taya's brother. "Get the women and children behind the rocks near the river. Keep them safe." When the riders arrived, torches flickered in the night like angry stars. The sheriff called out for the Apaches to come forward. Ethan stepped out from the shadows, his hand resting near his belt but his heart steady. "They had nothing to do with your fire," he said. "I checked the land myself. You'll have to shoot me first if you want them gone." The sheriff stared at him, his face tight with anger. "You'd stand against your own?" "I'm standing for what's right," Ethan said quietly. "You know me, Sheriff. You know my word." The two men held each other's gaze. The silence stretched long, broken only by the crackle of the torches and the wind sighing through the mesquite. Then an older rancher spoke up from behind the sheriff. "He's right," the man said. "I saw the sky flash that night. Lightning hit that fence." One by one, the men began to lower their torches. The sheriff's jaw worked as if chewing on pride. Then he turned his horse without another word. "Get back to town," he muttered. "We're done here." When the last of them rode away, the camp was silent except for the river. Ethan turned, breathing out slowly. Taya stood watching him, her eyes shining with tears that caught the firelight. "You'd risk your life for me again," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Guess I never stopped caring for you, Taya. Not then, not now." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire burned low, the stars reflected in the water. Finally, she stepped closer and rested her hand lightly against his arm. "Maybe this land is not cursed after all," she said softly. "Maybe it just needed people brave enough to stay." In the days that followed, peace slowly returned to the valley. The settlers and the Apache began to trade again, this time with more trust. Ethan helped rebuild the burned fence, and some of the Apache men came to lend a hand. The sheriff kept his distance but said nothing more. Taya started teaching the younger children from both sides, showing them the stories and words of her people. Her laughter returned to the valley, and Ethan often found himself watching her from the edge of the field, smiling quietly. Sometimes at sunset, they would meet by the river where they had first seen each other again. They spoke little because words weren't needed. The land around them glowed gold, the same land that had once divided them now holding them together. Years later, folks still told the story of the cowboy and the Apache woman who faced the whole town and changed the valley. They said love can't be buried by time or fear. Ethan and Taya proved it under the wide, endless western sky, where two hearts once separated by war found their way home again.